They thought I was too old to understand, too quiet to fight back, too gentle to see the truth standing right in front of me. But that night, as the music played and the champagne glasses clinked, I heard words that broke something inside me. I sat near the back of the wedding hall, watching my son dance with the woman he promised to love forever, feeling proud, peaceful, and a little tired. I thought it was a perfect evening until I passed the garden and heard her whisper. Her voice was soft but sharp, like glass cutting through air. "Give it a year," she said to her bridesmaid, laughing. "We'll put his mom in a nursing home and take that beach house. That view, worth every minute." I froze. My hands trembled, but my face didn't move. I smiled like nothing happened, like I hadn't just heard my own eviction plans spoken over wedding music. That beach house wasn't just a building. It was my husband's dream, my home, the place where my son learned to walk and where I planned to grow old, surrounded by memories. They didn't know it was still mine. They didn't know whose name was on those papers. I kept quiet, walked back to my seat, and lifted my glass as if to toast their future. But inside I whispered to myself, "This night won't end the way they think it will." Thank you so much for watching and staying with me, my dear ones. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so please tell me in the comments below. It always warms my heart to see where my story reaches. My name is Jane, and I live in a quiet town in Ohio, where the breeze from the lake still carries memories from years I thought I'd forgotten. I never imagined I'd be here, sitting alone, telling a story that still stings when I think about it. But sometimes life has a way of teaching you lessons when you least expect it. For most of my life, I was just a simple woman. I worked hard, raised my son on my own after losing my husband, and found peace in small things. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of waves against the shore, the laughter that once filled the beach house we built together. That home wasn't just wood and nails. It was the story of our lives written in salt air and sunlight. My husband, Thomas, built it with his own hands. Every beam, every corner carried his touch. When he passed, I promised him I'd keep it safe. I used to sit on the porch at dusk and feel him there beside me, as if the sea carried his voice back home each evening. Life after him was quiet, sometimes too quiet, but I managed. I found comfort in routine, in the garden he planted, in the family photos on the wall that reminded me I wasn't alone. Then my son met her. She was beautiful, confident, always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be. The first time she visited, she looked around my house as if she was already redecorating it in her head. I noticed, but I said nothing. Love makes you overlook what your heart tries to whisper. I told myself she was just nervous, that maybe she would come around once she felt like part of the family. When they got engaged, I gave them my blessing with tears in my eyes, thinking my husband would have wanted that. I even offered to host part of the wedding weekend at the beach house, to make new memories, to bring joy back into a place that had seen too many lonely sunsets. I didn't know that the same laughter echoing through my home that weekend would soon turn into the sound of greed. I thought I was being generous, showing them love the way I always had. But kindness can be dangerous when placed in the wrong hands. Sometimes people mistake gentleness for weakness. I didn't know that yet, but I was about to learn. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a dream I couldn't quite wake from. There were fittings, dinners, and endless talks about flowers, colors, and photographers. Everyone seemed so busy, rushing to make everything perfect, but I often found myself standing quietly in the corner, smiling, doing what mothers do best, watching, supporting, and staying out of the way. My son was happy, and that alone filled my heart with pride. I remember looking at him during one of the rehearsals, seeing the little boy I raised hidden beneath the man he had become. His laughter echoed in that same warm tone his father once had. It made me believe that maybe, despite her sharp edges, his new wife could bring light back into his life. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. I noticed little things though, the way she spoke to the waitstaff like they were beneath her, how her smile would fade when she thought no one was looking, and how she never once called me by my name. Always his mom, never Jane. That small word, that distance, said more than she realized. But I told myself not to mind it. After all, love can change people, right? That's what I thought. There was one afternoon, a week before the wedding, when she came by the beach house to pick up some boxes I was keeping for them. She stood in the doorway, wearing sunglasses, even though it was cloudy, and said with a little smirk, "You must love living here alone. It's peaceful, I guess, if you like quiet." I smiled and said, "I do. Quiet keeps me company." She laughed softly, that kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes, and replied, "Well, it's a lot of space for one person. Maybe someday it'll be filled with new life again." The way she said it made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. I even made her tea, tried to talk about family and how excited I was to see my son settle down, but she kept glancing at her phone. It was clear she was waiting to leave, not to listen. That night, I sat in the living room, the lamp casting soft light over the photos on the mantel. My husband's face looked back at me from a frame beside our son's graduation picture. I whispered to him like I often did, telling him about my day, about the woman our son had chosen, and about my worry that maybe she didn't see love the same way we did. I told him I'd keep an open heart anyway, because that's what he would have done. The morning of the wedding, the sky was a gentle blue, and the ocean looked endless. I wore a light silver dress, simple but elegant, one my son said made me look graceful. I remember brushing my hair carefully, thinking of how proud Thomas would have been to see our boy get married. I left early, wanting to help with the last-minute decorations, but when I arrived, everything was already buzzing with activity. She was in charge, directing people, giving orders, and barely looking my way. When she finally did, her smile felt forced, like a photograph you take just to be polite. I stood aside most of the day, greeting relatives, hugging old friends, feeling that warm rush of happiness that only comes when your child is starting a new chapter. I thought of all the nights I worked extra shifts just to afford his college tuition, all the times I stayed awake when he was sick, all the years of sacrifice that led to that moment of seeing him happy. I didn't need attention. I didn't want speeches or thanks. Just seeing him smile was enough. As the ceremony began, I felt tears gather in my eyes. I held my breath as they exchanged vows, promising to honor and cherish each other forever. For a brief moment, I believed them. The music played, the crowd clapped, and laughter filled the air. But even as I joined the celebration, something in me stayed still, watching, observing. I couldn't shake that quiet unease that had been following me since the day she first stepped into my life. Later, during the reception, as everyone danced and laughed, I stood by the window looking out at the ocean. The moonlight shimmered across the waves, and I thought of the many nights Thomas and I watched that same view together, holding hands and dreaming of the future. That house, that view, that peace, it was our legacy. I didn't know that within hours, the very thing we built with love would become the target of someone else's greed. I didn't know that the laughter I heard around me was the calm before a storm that would test every ounce of my strength. When I walked through the garden later that night, my heart was light, unaware that I was just steps away from a truth that would change everything. If I had known what was waiting for me just beyond those flowers, maybe I would have stayed inside. Maybe I would have turned back. But life doesn't give warnings. Sometimes it just opens a door and lets you walk right into betrayal, dressed up as celebration. The music from the reception floated through the night air, soft and cheerful, but it sounded distant, almost hollow, as I walked along the path lined with roses. I remember thinking how beautiful the lights looked hanging between the trees, like tiny stars trying to compete with the real ones above. The scent of salt and flowers mixed together, and for a moment I felt peaceful, proud even, that my son's big day had gone so perfectly. I was on my way back to the hall when I heard laughter coming from the side of the garden. It was sharp, almost cruel, the kind of laughter that doesn't belong in a moment meant for love. I slowed down, not wanting to interrupt, but then I heard her voice. My new daughter-in-law. Her tone was low and confident, the kind people use when they think no one else is listening. She was speaking to her bridesmaid, words dripping with arrogance and certainty. "Give it a year," she said. "We'll put his mom in a nursing home and take that beach house. That view is worth every bit of patience." They both laughed, loud and careless, as if the words weren't heavy enough to crush a heart. I stood there, hidden behind a hedge, the night breeze brushing against my skin, and in that single moment, everything inside me went quiet. I didn't cry, I didn't gasp, I didn't even move. I just listened. Every syllable burned itself into my memory, and I knew then that the woman my son married didn't see me as family. To her, I was an obstacle, a key she needed to get to what she wanted. My heart hurt, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that my son had tied his life to someone who could speak about his own mother that way. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and straightened my shoulders. When I stepped out from that garden path, I walked back into the hall as if nothing had happened. I smiled when people greeted me, I hugged those who congratulated me, and when I raised my glass to toast the couple, my voice didn't tremble. But inside, something changed. A quiet wall built itself around my heart, made of hurt and resolve. They thought I didn't hear them. They thought I was too old, too harmless, too small to matter. They would soon learn that silence doesn't mean weakness. It only means someone has begun to think. That night after the wedding, when the guests were gone and the laughter had faded into silence, I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I ever had before. The road was dark and empty, the moonlight following me like an old friend trying to comfort me. But I couldn't shake the ache that had settled deep inside my chest. When I reached the beach house, the one they had spoken about so carelessly, I didn't go inside right away. I stood by the gate, listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, steady and relentless, like a heartbeat that refused to stop no matter what tried to break it. I thought about my husband and how hard he worked to give us this place, how many nights he spent repairing the roof, painting the deck, and talking about how one day our grandchildren might play in the sand out front. To think that someone who barely knew him could stand at our wedding and plot to take it all away, it felt like losing him all over again. I walked through the door, turned on the lamp, and the light fell over the pictures on the wall. There we were, smiling, years younger, with hope in our eyes and dreams too big to fit in one lifetime. My fingers touched the glass, tracing his face, and I whispered softly, "You'd know what to do, wouldn't you, Thomas?" The room stayed quiet, but in my heart, I felt the answer. He always said, "Jane, never let kindness make you blind." I realized that was exactly what I had done. I sat down at the kitchen table and let the silence wrap around me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an old woman living alone. I felt like someone waking up from a long sleep, someone who'd just seen the truth with painful clarity. I thought of my son, my sweet boy, who trusted too easily, who believed love was enough to fix everything. He didn't know what she said, of course, and maybe that was the part that hurt most. The clock on the wall ticked softly, every second louder than the one before, and I found myself thinking about everything they must have discussed behind closed doors, their future plans, the house they thought they would inherit, the comfort they imagined they'd find once I was out of the way. It was greed dressed up as ambition, cruelty disguised as charm. I poured myself a glass of water, sat back, and decided I wouldn't let anger swallow me. I wouldn't confront them, not yet. I would do something better, something smarter. I would protect what was mine, without shouting, without scenes, without bitterness. I'd do it the way I've done everything in my life, with calm, with grace, and with the quiet kind of power they underestimated. That night I didn't cry, not a single tear. I just smiled faintly and whispered, "You made your plans, my dear, and now it's time I make mine." The morning sun came through the curtains gently, but it felt different that day, heavier somehow, as if even the light knew something inside me had changed. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, listening to the sound of the waves outside, trying to make sense of everything that had happened the night before. My heart didn't ache anymore, not in the way it did when I first heard those words. It felt steady now, strong, like the sea after a storm. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat at the table where Thomas used to read his newspaper every morning. I imagined him there, smiling behind those glasses, reminding me of how many times we'd faced hardships and made it through. He always believed that the quietest people often make the loudest impact when the time is right. I smiled to myself as I reached for my phone, because that was the moment I knew what I had to do. I called my lawyer first, an old friend who'd helped Thomas and me set up our family trust years ago. He answered on the second ring, his voice surprised but warm, and when I told him I wanted to make some quick changes to a few properties, there was a long pause on the other end. "Jane," he said carefully, "is everything all right?" I told him it was more than all right, that it was finally time to put things in order. We talked for a while, going through the papers that named me as the sole owner of both the beach house and the duplex my son and his wife had been renting. When we finished, he said something that stayed with me. "You've always had more power than you think." I hung up and sat in silence, letting his words settle deep inside me. Then I called my realtor, a kind woman who'd helped me buy the duplex years ago. I told her I was ready to sell both properties, and she asked if I was sure. "Completely," I said. "List them by the end of the day." My voice didn't shake once. After hanging up, I went out onto the deck. The ocean breeze brushed against my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was peace, the kind that comes when you stop waiting for people to do right by you and start doing right by yourself. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to sign the paperwork. The realtor smiled when she saw me, said it was rare to meet someone who knew exactly what they wanted. I told her that time teaches clarity if you pay attention. By evening, everything was set in motion. I went home, made a simple dinner, and watched the sun sink into the horizon. I thought about them, still on their honeymoon, laughing, planning, believing everything was theirs for the taking. I almost felt sorry for what was coming, almost. But then I remembered those words whispered over wedding laughter, and that pity disappeared like a wave pulling back into the sea. I didn't tell anyone what I had done, not even my son. I just sat there, feeling the stillness around me, the calm before truth makes its quiet entrance. Sometimes, strength isn't about how loud you speak, it's about how much you do while saying nothing at all. The days that followed felt strangely peaceful, like the quiet before rain. I went about my routine as if nothing had changed, watering the plants, folding laundry, and walking along the beach each morning, my footprints fading softly behind me. But beneath that calm surface, I knew the tide was already shifting. Every paper was signed, every decision sealed, and all that was left now was time. They were still away on their honeymoon, sending pictures to family, smiling wide in every photo. My son looked happy, unaware of the storm waiting on their return, and though a part of me wished I could protect him from what was coming, another part of me knew it was a truth he needed to face. Sometimes life doesn't teach lessons gently, especially when love blinds you to someone's intentions. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was her number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice came through sweet and practiced, dripping with the kind of politeness that hides calculation. "Hi, Mom," she began, stretching the word like it hurt her to say it. "We were just talking about you. We hope you're doing well. You must be so lonely in that big house all by yourself." I smiled quietly, letting her talk, letting her dig her own hole one word at a time. Then she continued, her tone softer, almost hesitant. "You know, we were thinking maybe it's time for you to consider something easier. Like assisted living, or maybe selling the beach house and moving closer to town. It's too much work for you, and you deserve rest." I could almost hear her smirk hiding behind those words, the way she tried to make manipulation sound like care. My fingers tightened around the phone, but my voice stayed calm, light even. "That's kind of you to worry about me," I said, "but I'm quite comfortable where I am." She paused, maybe surprised that I didn't sound as frail or uncertain as she expected. Then she laughed softly. "Oh, of course, just thinking ahead, you know? For when you're ready." I told her I'd think about it, thanked her for calling, and wished them a safe flight home. The moment I hung up, I let out a long breath and shook my head. I had been underestimated all my life, by men who thought I couldn't handle finances, by relatives who pitied my quietness, and now by a girl who thought kindness meant surrender. But I had learned to survive storms much stronger than her. That evening, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the sea roll in with its endless patience. There was something healing in that rhythm, something that reminded me that justice, like the ocean, doesn't rush, it arrives when it's ready. I thought about what would happen when they got home, how her painted smile would fade the moment she saw that sign planted in the yard. I didn't crave her pain, but I needed her to understand the weight of her choices. You can't build your happiness on someone else's ruin and expect it to stand. Before I went to bed, I looked up at the sky, at the stars glowing faintly above the water, and whispered to Thomas again, "It's almost done, my love. They'll learn that greed always costs more than it gives." Then I turned off the light, calm and unshaken, because I knew that in the morning, truth would finally begin its quiet work. The morning they returned from their honeymoon, the sky was bright and cloudless, the kind of day that usually brought comfort, but for them, it carried something they didn't expect. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my tea when the realtor called to confirm that both for sale signs had been placed exactly as requested. One stood in front of the beach house, the other in the yard of the duplex where they lived. I thanked her calmly and told her I'd pass by later to sign the final documents. My hands didn't tremble, my heart didn't race. I just felt an overwhelming sense of peace, like the sound of the ocean at low tide, quiet but certain. By early afternoon, I drove past their street. The sun shimmered against the white letters of that sign, sold, standing proudly on the lawn. I didn't stop, didn't linger. I only glanced once, long enough to see that the world had shifted, that what once belonged to me was now untouchable to those who thought they could claim it. It wasn't revenge that filled my chest, it was relief. The deep kind that comes from setting something free. As I headed home, I thought about all the years I had worked, the sacrifices, the nights of saving every penny, and how my husband and I built our lives piece by piece, not through greed, but through love. Protecting what we built wasn't cruelty. It was respect. For him, for myself, for everything that home represented. That evening, I knew they had found out because the phone began ringing nonstop. I let it ring. The calls came one after another until finally I answered. It was my son, his voice panicked, broken in a way that twisted my heart but didn't shake my resolve. "Mom," he said, "there's been a mistake. The realtor says our house is being sold. They say your name's on everything." His wife's voice echoed faintly in the background, shrill and angry. I waited a moment before speaking, steady and slow. "There's no mistake, dear. The homes are mine and they've always been. You just never asked, and she never cared to find out." There was silence, then a quiet sob I could tell wasn't from her. I closed my eyes, feeling the ache of a mother who had to choose between love and self-respect, and for once I chose myself. She took the phone then, her tone sharp and furious. "You can't do this. You're destroying your son's life. You're being selfish." I almost laughed, not out of cruelty but disbelief, at the audacity of someone who had plotted to take everything from me, accusing me of doing the same. "I'm not destroying anything," I said softly. "I'm just removing what was never yours to take." She hung up before I could finish, her anger filling the silence she left behind. I set the phone down, took a long breath, and looked out the window at the waves rolling in under the moonlight. Everything was calm again. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe in my own skin. They thought they could build their comfort on my back, but I'd spent a lifetime carrying others. It was time to stand tall on my own. And as the night deepened, I whispered to myself, not with bitterness, but with quiet triumph. They took my kindness for weakness. And today, they learned the difference. The next few days passed in a kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. The kind where you can finally hear yourself think again. I didn't answer any more calls, and I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. People will twist your truth when they can't control it, and I wasn't about to let anyone turn my peace into guilt. I spent my mornings on the porch, sipping tea, watching the tide roll in and out, the waves as patient as I had learned to be. I knew there would be gossip. Families always talk when someone chooses self-respect over silence. Some said I was heartless, others called me brave, but none of them had heard what I heard that night in the garden. None of them had felt the sting of betrayal from the very person you spent your life protecting. It's easy to judge when it's not your heart being trampled on. One afternoon, I drove by the beach house for the last time. The new owners were already moving in, a young couple with their children running along the sand, laughing, chasing the waves like the world belonged to them. It made me smile, because that's what that home deserved. Joy, not greed. I parked for a moment, rolled down the window, and let the sea air fill the car. I whispered, "You're in good hands now, my love," as if Thomas could still hear me. Then I drove away without looking back. Sometimes closure doesn't come from taking something back. It comes from knowing you left it better than those who tried to destroy it. At home, the air felt lighter. I opened the windows and let the wind carry out the last traces of tension that had lingered for weeks. I rearranged the living room, took down old curtains, cleaned the kitchen from top to bottom, and when I finally sat down, I realized how much peace there is in starting over, even when it comes late in life. A few days later, a letter arrived from my son. The handwriting was shaky, the words short but heavy with regret. He said he didn't know about her plan, that he never meant to hurt me, that he wished he had listened more and assumed less. I read it twice before placing it in my drawer. I believed him, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of what's already burned down, so you can stand in what's still standing. That night, I walked along the beach near my new cottage. The moonlight stretched across the water, calm and endless. The sea had always been my comfort, my mirror. It reminded me that life, like the ocean, can be wild and cruel, but it also knows how to cleanse itself. I thought about her, wondering if she ever realized what she lost, not just the houses or the comfort, but the chance to be part of something real, something rooted in love instead of possession. Some lessons arrive as whispers, and some as waves. Hers came as both. I smiled to myself, feeling no bitterness, only clarity. People who mistake kindness for weakness always learn the hardest way that gentleness can carry the sharpest edge when tested. As I stood there, with the salt wind brushing my face, I knew I had reclaimed more than property. I had reclaimed my dignity, my peace, and the quiet strength that had always lived in me. A few months passed before I heard from them again. Life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't known in years, quiet and unhurried. I woke up each morning with no dread, no anxious thoughts waiting at the edge of my mind. My garden was thriving. My mornings were slow and my evenings were peaceful. Then, one afternoon, as I was trimming the roses near the porch, I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. My heart sank a little, not from fear or anger, but from the old ache that comes when love and disappointment live in the same breath. My son stepped out, thinner than I remembered, his shoulders heavy, his eyes unsure. He walked toward me like a boy again, not the man who had once thought his mother was too fragile to notice the truth. We stood there for a moment, both silent, the air thick with everything neither of us had said. Then he spoke, his voice low and trembling. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what she said that night. I swear I didn't." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion behind his apology, the kind that comes when you've seen someone's true nature too late. He told me they were no longer together, that things fell apart after the sale, that he finally understood the kind of woman she really was. I listened, not interrupting, not judging, just letting him speak. When he was done, I reached out and touched his arm gently. "You didn't fail me," I said softly. "You just trusted the wrong heart." His eyes filled with tears, and in that moment, I realized I had already forgiven him long before he asked. We went inside, sat at the table where so many of our memories lived, and I poured him a cup of tea, the same way I used to when he was little. We talked for hours, not about what was lost, but about what could still be saved. He told me he couldn't sleep after finding out what she had planned, that it kept replaying in his head, the cruelty, the deceit, the betrayal. I told him that life has a way of showing us what we refuse to see, until the truth leaves no room for comfort. And that's exactly what happened to my son. Sitting across from him that afternoon, I could see how much he had aged in those few short months. The confidence that once filled his voice was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness that comes when pride finally bows its head to humility. He kept saying he should have listened more, that he should have noticed the small things, the way she looked at the beach house, the way she always asked about money, the way she treated people who couldn't give her anything. I didn't scold him. There was no need. The world had already done that for me. I told him that we all learn, some through kindness and others through pain, but what matters is what we do after the lesson finds us. He asked if I regretted selling the houses, if I ever thought about what would have happened if I'd stayed quiet. I smiled faintly, stirred my tea, and told him no, I didn't regret a thing. There comes a time, I said, when protecting peace means closing doors that love keeps trying to reopen. I told him that the houses were never just about ownership or money. They were symbols of the life his father and I built with our bare hands, a life based on hard work, not greed. Protecting that legacy wasn't about taking something from him. It was about teaching him that respect is not inherited, it's earned. He nodded, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes, and whispered that he finally understood. As the day turned into evening, we sat on the porch together, watching the sun dip into the horizon. The air was still, soft, golden. For a long while, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. There are moments when silence carries more forgiveness than words ever could. Before he left, he hugged me longer than he had in years and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I held him tightly and whispered, "A mother doesn't give up, she just steps back when she needs to." When he drove away, I stood at the gate, watching the taillights fade down the road. I didn't cry. I just felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. I knew that somewhere deep inside, something had been healed. It didn't erase the pain or the betrayal, but it reminded me that love, when it survives truth, becomes stronger than it was before. After that day, life slipped back into a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years, the kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket on a cold night. I still woke early, still made my tea, still walked along the beach, but something inside me had shifted. The bitterness that once lingered in my chest was gone, replaced by understanding, by quiet strength. Sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing what's broken. It comes from accepting that not everything was meant to be repaired. My son visited often after that. He'd stop by with groceries, fix little things around the house, or just sit with me on the porch, talking about life as if we were old friends, rediscovering each other. Each time he came, he seemed lighter, freer, as if the shadow of that marriage had finally lifted. Watching him heal was like watching spring return after a long winter. One afternoon, as we sat together watching the tide roll in, he asked me how I managed to stay so calm through everything, how I didn't let anger consume me. I smiled and told him the truth. I learned that anger only burns the hand that holds it, I said. What they did was cruel, but carrying it would have made me just like them. He looked at me, eyes full of regret and admiration, and said I was stronger than anyone he knew. I told him strength isn't loud or proud. It's the quiet decision to keep your heart kind, even when the world gives you every reason not to. He reached for my hand, and in that simple gesture, I felt all the distance that had once existed between us melt away. After he left that evening, I sat outside for a long time, watching the waves crash gently against the shore. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, and the sound of seagulls carried across the water like a hymn. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the choices I made, and I realized something. Life doesn't give you peace as a gift. It gives you chaos, and you have to carve peace out of it yourself. I had done that. Not by shouting, not by seeking revenge, but by standing quietly in my truth and letting time do the rest. As the first stars began to appear, I whispered a little prayer of gratitude, not just for what I had overcome, but for the lesson hidden inside the pain. I thanked Thomas for the strength he left behind in me, for the wisdom that guided me when I didn't know where to turn. I knew now that love never really leaves, it just changes shape. Sometimes it becomes memory, sometimes protection, and sometimes it becomes the courage to walk alone with your head held high. That night, as I went inside and turned off the lights, I smiled to myself, knowing I had made it through the storm with grace intact. There was no revenge in my heart, only the calm satisfaction that comes from surviving with dignity and never letting anyone rewrite the story of who you are. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice how different life felt when peace was no longer something I had to defend. Everything seemed softer. Even the sound of the wind against the windows carried a kind of gentleness that had been missing before. I spent more time reading, cooking meals that reminded me of my husband, and tending to the flowers in the garden that he had planted years ago. Sometimes my son would call just to check in, his voice lighter now, steady in a way that told me he was finding his way back to himself. It made me proud to know that after everything, he had learned that real love isn't about taking, it's about protecting, even when it hurts. I never spoke badly of her, not to him or anyone else. I didn't need to. The truth always finds its way into the light, and when it does, it doesn't need to shout. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset stretch across the horizon, I thought about how far I had come. There was a time when I thought losing something meant the end of my story. But now I understood that sometimes loss is just life clearing a space for peace to move in. I wasn't angry anymore. In fact, I found myself grateful. Grateful that I heard what I heard that night, grateful that I had the courage to act, and grateful that I had chosen silence over bitterness. Because silence, when it's grounded in truth, speaks louder than any argument ever could. I've learned that growing older isn't about fading away. It's about finally seeing clearly. You begin to understand who truly loves you, who only stood beside you for convenience, and what really matters when everything else is stripped away. Dignity, peace, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to be proven. Those are the treasures life gives you when you've survived enough storms to stop fearing the rain. Thank you, my dear ones, for staying with me till the very end of my story. If this story touched your heart, or reminded you that strength can live quietly inside anyone, please subscribe, share this video, and tell me in the comments what lesson it left in yours. Sometimes the best kind of victory is the one that ends in peace.